Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
Lake Effect brings you conversations about what's happening in Milwaukee and the people, places, and organizations that shape our community. This is Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
The scientific journal Nature Climate Change found 89% of the world's population wants to see their government act on climate change. As the annual Global Climate Change Conference is about to kick off in Brazil, we're looking at attitudes on climate change here in Wisconsin. WUWM environmental reporter Susan Bence checked in with Cody Kamrowski, the executive director of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation.
The Wisconsin Wildlife Federation, we are 76 or 77 years old now, and we are an affiliate to the National Wildlife Federation. And we are standalone, separate nonprofits, but we choose to work together. So we don't necessarily have a thumb over one another, but we benefit mutually from these relationships. And the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation has a very similar structure. We have over 200 affiliated clubs, organizations, grassroots, advocacy type organizations. If they have an interest in natural resources, they can become an affiliate. And it really gives us a lot of strength and unity in the state legislature, as well as talking about conservation issues, because we represent so many groups from across the state. Ranging on size, economic status, as well as geographic expanse. Our bread and butter is in policy advocacy and educating the public on natural resources issues.
Across the world, 89% of people feel that governments should act on climate change. So talking to some hunters and anglers, I got a variety of thoughts on that. Is that what you would find within your organization?
Yeah, which can make it very tough sometimes for us to move in a positive direction, but we have, and it's come through long education and awareness. At the end of the day, leaning on the science and seeing what the science says, and it's clearly pointing that this is happening. So we do need to figure out how to get on board and try to advocate for climate change adaptation for our natural resources management, or ways to reduce the impacts of climate change, or invest in renewable energy.
As you meet with organizations, as your committees meet, is that language, is climate change baked into the workings of the thing, or are you looking at how can we best conserve and how do we adapt and steer away from that term, climate change?
Sometimes it depends on the demographic that we're like. For me, for instance, if I am going to, say, inner city Madison to talk to a conservation group about, water quality, I can be pretty easygoing with the language of, climate change, climate adaptation, carbon capture. But if I'm going to a very rural northern Wisconsin organization or a rod and gun club close to my house, I can use it. I just need to be pretty tactful with how I use it and the implications of it. And I don't think it's from a lack of understanding climate change. I think it's just with our hyper political world we're in today. And again, this is me personally thinking it's a little bit more about branding and the messaging of it. And I think that's what, people get put in these camps of, pro versus anti. And what has worked really well for me in these conversations is talking about actual tangible impacts for people. We measure rainfall in inches now, not tenths of an inch. 20 years ago, everything was a tenth of an inch. Or for ice fishing, well, it's hard to even get ice or, good safe ice for the year, or good snow cover for snowmobiling. Or even logging industries rely heavily on frost on the landscape to be able to get to some of those wetter areas to harvest timber. That is not happening near to the degree it once was. And that's where I've had some very positive conversations with these groups that they get it. They see the impacts. They just don't want to say climate change, I guess, is the best way to say it. But if you talk about the impact today, they get that. But start talking solutions, that part can get a little tricky sometimes.
Your organization and your member organizations are actively working to protect, to conserve our natural resources, the wildlife, the forests, the wetlands, all of these elements of our world. But the term climate change has become increasingly politicized.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the word tariff today. Maybe it's a poor analogy, but it's maybe just a contentious word that, I don't know, it's maybe more symbolic, and that's what I receive pushback on. But if I talk more about the actual on the ground impacts, on a personal level with people, they seem to be a lot more receptive to those conversations.
In terms of climate change, where should the action, where should this be happening? At a federal level, at a regional, state, local? Can you speak on that from your perspective and how your organization would approach it?
I think climate change mitigation and adaptation should happen on every level of government. If it's just the Fed saying yes or no, all the way down to state governments, county government, local government, they're the ones that actually are implementing projects or work or mitigation efforts. And it's got to be a pretty fluid initiative all the way through. Yes, certain states can show a lot more initiative versus other states, or certain counties can, but it's got to have some level of support on all levels of government. Obviously, with a lot of these federal pullbacks in renewable energy investment, it will make it more challenging, but it's still very feasible, just because it is the most economically feasible energy source there is right now. Energy and cost input per kilowatt energy output, solar beats everybody, even without subsidies. So that's the part that we have to sell. I think it comes down to some of the branding and the phrasing. Just with the audiences I work with, sometimes I'm working with very, very left audiences, and then I'm working with very right audiences, and I got to figure out the right messaging for each of them. Say I'm talking to, I guess, somebody that's not really sympathetic to renewable energy. I like to talk to them about the local economy, the local investments for doing those type of projects. Then if I'm talking with a very pro and renewable energy group, I actually have to backpedal the conversation a little bit, because the one narrative that turns a lot of people off who maybe are on the fence with renewable energy to fight climate change, and honestly, myself included, a really scary dynamic I've heard a lot over the past few years is saying, I don't care what negative impacts the solar farm is going to have on the landscape, because the solar farm needs to be put in because climate change trumps all. And that is a pretty dangerous dynamic to have, because it is exactly what Congress, or I guess Republicans, said about energy development in the 70s. Doesn't matter, drill baby drill, we got to have energy no matter what. And that trumps all. And that's a dangerous, slippery slope to go down.
So to ask the sort of simplistic question, would you or your organization fall within that 89%? It's actually a complicated question, isn't it? A nuanced question.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely or it can be nuanced if you want it to be. But yeah, we totally fall in that 89%. We know it's here. We know we need to adapt. Regardless of what's causing it, we need to adapt regardless. Adaptation is part of the solution, as well as a path forward to help mitigate not only the impacts of climate change, but the cause of it. Yeah, we fall in that 89%. For sure.
Is there anything you want to leave for people to think about?
I mean, I would just have people look at, there's nothing politically polarizing looking at rainfall, 1 inch versus 1/10 of an inch, or frost isn't happening in certain parts of, the state, or, our winters are becoming very mild. There should not be a darn thing that's political about that. That is 100% observational. That's what I ask people to just take a step back and look at. Open your eyes and your ears and, look back 20 years, just draw some comparisons. And I think a lot of humans, especially right now, we want to be told what to think and observe. And I think if we just take a step back and live for ourselves and actually think for ourselves and observe the natural world around us, I think that it will be the single most enlightening thing right now.
Cody Kamrowski is the executive director of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation. He spoke with WUWM environmental reporter Susan Bence.
You can find more interviews like this one by visiting WUWM.com/Lake Effect. And while you're there, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast.